There is something watching you right now, not from outside, not from somewhere above or beyond, from inside the very act of your perception. Something that has been watching every thought you've ever had, every emotion you've ever felt, every story you've ever told yourself about who you are and why your life looks the way it does. Something that has been present through every moment of confusion, every cycle of self-sabotage. Every time you convinced yourself the problem was out there, in them, in the circumstances, in the timing, in the luck you were or weren't given. It has been watching all of it, and here's what's strange, here's what should stop you cold right now. You have never once questioned what that thing is. You've been so busy being the one who reacts, the one who plans, the one who worries, the one who hopes, the one who tries and fails and tries again, that you have completely overlooked the one who is watching all of it happen. Today, that changes, because what you are about to see cannot be unseen. And I want to be precise about what I mean by that. I don't mean you'll gain some new belief, some upgraded perspective, some better framework for thinking about your life. I mean that when you actually look, really look, at the watcher behind the illusion, something in the structure of your reality shifts. Not metaphorically, not poetically, structurally, at the level of what is actually happening when consciousness meets the world it perceives. This is not philosophy, this is measurable. The quantum double-slit experiment proves something that physicists have been quietly uncomfortable with for over 100 years. When a particle is not being observed, it exists as a wave of probability. Not a thing, not a location, not a fixed point in space, but a spread of potential. Every possible position it could occupy exists simultaneously. The particle is, in a very real sense, everywhere and nowhere at once. But the moment an observer enters the picture, the moment consciousness turns its attention toward that particle and measures it, the wave collapses. All that potential, all that spread of possibility resolves into a single, specific, measurable point. The observer doesn't just detect reality, the observer creates it. Now sit with that for a moment. Don't rush past what you just saw, because if that is true at the quantum level, and the evidence is overwhelming that it is, then the question you should be asking yourself right now is not how to manifest better outcomes, or attract the right circumstances, or fix the patterns that keep repeating. The question is, who is the observer in your life? What is the quality of the consciousness doing the watching? What is it actually seeing, and what has it been avoiding seeing? Because here is what no one tells you about observation. The particles in your life, the patterns, the relationships, the recurring situations, the emotional loops that won't stop cycling, they are also in a state of quantum superposition until they are truly seen. Not glanced at, not reacted to, not managed or analyzed or judged, truly seen. Witnessed with the kind of clear, steady, unflinching attention that collapses the wave function of your own experience into something real, something resolved, something that can finally transform. What you observe, you change. What you avoid observing controls you. And most of us have been avoiding the most important observation of all. We have been so thoroughly identified with the contents of our experience, the thoughts, the feelings, the stories, the identity, that we have completely missed the one who is watching all of it, the watcher behind the illusion, the consciousness that is present before the thought arises, during the thought, and after the thought dissolves. The awareness that has never not been there, watching everything changing nothing by force, transforming everything by presence. That is what we are going to look at today. Not around it, not at a comfortable distance, directly at it. Because the moment you finally see the watcher, the moment you stop confusing yourself with the contents of your experience and recognize the awareness that is watching those contents, everything changes. Not because you've gained something new, because you've finally seen what was already there, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. If this kind of seeing matters to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find their way to the watcher, and there's much more of this waiting for you here. Let's begin by looking at the illusion first, because you can't see the watcher clearly until you understand what it's been watching. There is a construction happening inside you right now. It has been happening for as long as you can remember, and it is so continuous, so seamless, so automatic that you have almost certainly never noticed it as a construction. You call it yourself, your identity, the person you are, the story of your life, the character with your name, who has your history, your personality, your preferences, your wounds, your strengths, your fears. It feels absolutely real. It feels like the most fundamental thing about you. It feels like the ground you stand on. But look closer. Where does this self actually live? Try to find it, not conceptually. Actually look for it. Is it in your body? Which part? Is it in your brain? In which neurons, which circuits, which firing patterns? Is it in your memories? But memories change, distort, disappear, and you remain. Is it in your personality? But your personality shifts depending on who you're with, what you've eaten, how much you've slept, what decade of your life you're in. Is it in your beliefs? But your beliefs have changed dramatically over the course of your life. And through all those changes, something remained that was watching the beliefs change. You cannot find the self as an object. And that is not a failure of your search. That is the result of it. The self you've been living as is not a thing. It is a process. A continuous, dynamic, moment-to-moment construction that your nervous system performs so rapidly and so automatically that it feels like a fixed entity. Neuroscientists call this the narrative self, the brain's ongoing story about who you are, stitched together from memory, prediction, social feedback, and pattern recognition. It is extraordinarily useful. It allows you to navigate the world, maintain relationships, pursue goals, learn from experience, but it is not what you fundamentally are. It is what the watcher has been watching. And here is where it gets precise, because the confusion between the watcher and the watched, between the observer and the contents being observed, is not just a philosophical error. It is the source of almost every form of psychological suffering. When you fuse with the contents of your experience, when you become the thought instead of the one watching the thought, when you become the emotion instead of the one witnessing the emotion, when you become the story instead of the awareness in which the story is arising, you lose access to the most powerful position available to you. The observer position, the watcher's seat, and from that seat, reality transforms. Not because the watcher controls anything, not because observation is some kind of psychic manipulation of circumstances, but because the quality of your observation determines the quality of your perception, and the quality of your perception determines what you can see, and what you can see is the only thing you can ever respond to. Most people are not responding to reality. They are responding to a filtered, distorted, emotionally charged version of reality that their narrative self has constructed. And they are doing it on autopilot, from the inside of the construction, with no awareness that a construction is happening. The watcher sees all of this. The watcher has always seen all of this. The watcher is not confused. The watcher is not suffering. The watcher is not trying to fix anything or escape anything or become something better. The watcher is simply watching. And in that watching, something extraordinary is always available. The capacity to see clearly, which is the only thing that ever actually transforms what is seen. Let me show you something. There is a man named Elias. He is 34 years old, and he has spent the last decade trying to understand why his life keeps arriving at the same place. Different city, different job, different relationship, same feeling. The feeling that something is fundamentally wrong, that he is fundamentally wrong, that no matter how much he improves himself, no matter how many books he reads or habits he builds or therapists he sees, there is something underneath all of it that remains untouched, something he cannot reach by trying harder. Elias is intelligent. He is self-aware in the way that people who have done a lot of work on themselves are self-aware. He can name his patterns. He can trace his wounds back to their origins. He can articulate with precision why he does the things he does. And yet the patterns continue. The wound keeps bleeding. The naming has not changed anything. One evening, Elias is sitting in his apartment after yet another conversation that ended the way all his conversations end, with him feeling unseen, misunderstood, slightly betrayed by someone he'd trusted. He is watching the familiar cascade of thoughts begin, the analysis, the blame, the self-recrimination, the spiral into what this means about him, about others, about the fundamental nature of connection. He has been here so many times that he can almost predict the exact sequence of thoughts before they arrive. And then something strange happens. Instead of following the thoughts, Elias watches himself about to follow them. He catches the moment just before the cascade begins, and for a fraction of a second, he sees the whole thing from outside. He sees the thought arising. He sees the familiar pull toward it. He sees the way his body is already tensing in preparation for the spiral. He sees all of it, and he sees it from somewhere that is not inside it. He doesn't do anything with this. He doesn't try to stop the thoughts or redirect them or replace them with better ones. He just watches. He stays in that position, the position of the one who sees. And he watches the cascade begin and unfold and reach its familiar crescendo and then slowly dissolve. Not because he fought it, not because he transcended it, because he watched it, because the quality of his attention was different this time. Because instead of being inside the construction, he was watching the construction from the awareness that contains it. And in that watching, something shifted that all his years of trying had not shifted. Not the content of his thoughts, not his understanding of his patterns, not his beliefs about himself or others, something more fundamental. The relationship between Elias and his experience changed. He was no longer identical to the contents. He was the watcher of the contents. And from that position, the contents, the patterns, the pain, the familiar spiral, looked different. Not smaller, not less real, but less solid, less inevitable. Less like the truth of who he was and more like weather passing through the sky of his awareness. The sky does not become the storm. The sky contains the storm, and the sky is never damaged by what passes through it. Elias sat with this for a long time. He didn't rush to understand it or categorize it or turn it into a new framework. He just stayed in the watching. And in the watching, something that had felt permanent revealed itself as temporary. Something that had felt like identity revealed itself as content. Something that had felt like the truth revealed itself as a construction. Real as a construction, significant as a construction, but not the ground, not the watcher, not what he fundamentally was. That night, Elias did not fix anything. He did not resolve the pattern or heal the wound or become a better version of himself. He simply saw the watcher for the first time. And in seeing it, he recognized something that changed everything. Not by changing anything, but by changing where he was standing when he looked. Now look at your own life through this lens. Think about the thing you keep cycling through, the pattern that returns no matter how many times you've addressed it, the relationship dynamic that keeps appearing in different costumes, the emotional state that keeps claiming you even when you thought you'd moved past it, the belief about yourself that hides underneath all the growth and the work and the improvement. Think about that thing. Hold it in your awareness right now. Now ask yourself, have you ever actually watched it, or have you been inside it every time it appeared? Because there is a crucial difference between experiencing something and observing it. When you are inside the experience, you are the experience. You are the anger, the fear, the shame, the confusion. The thought is thinking itself through you. The emotion is moving you. The pattern is running you. You are not watching it. You are it. And from inside a pattern, you cannot see the pattern. You can only feel it, react to it, try to manage it, try to escape it, try to understand it from within the very structure that is generating the confusion. But when you step into the observer position, when you find the watcher that has been watching all of it, something entirely different becomes possible. You can see the whole thing. Not just the surface, not just the symptom, but the architecture, the structure of the construction, the mechanism by which the pattern generates itself. And in seeing it clearly, in really, truly, unflinchingly seeing it, you change your relationship to it in a way that no amount of trying, fixing, or understanding from inside the pattern ever could. This is the observer effect at the level of consciousness. I want to ask you something directly here. What did you see when you stopped looking away? Not what you analyzed or understood, what you actually saw when you brought clear attention to the thing you've been managing. Drop it in the comments. One sentence is enough. The field of people watching this is larger than you think, and what you name, you make more real for everyone. Let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing when you look at the quantum mechanics of this, because I want you to understand why this is not a metaphor. In quantum physics, the act of measurement, the act of observation, does not simply reveal what was already there. It participates in the creation of what is there. Before measurement, the quantum system exists in superposition. All possible states simultaneously real, none of them definite. The moment observation occurs, the system collapses into a specific state. The observer and the observed are not separate, they are entangled. The act of looking is the act of creating what is seen. Now, physicists debate exactly what this means at the macroscopic scale of human experience. The quantum world and the everyday world operate under different apparent rules, and the translation from one to the other is not simple or straightforward. But here is what is not debatable. Consciousness and observation are not passive, they are active. They participate in the structure of experience. What you attend to, how you attend to it, the quality and clarity of your attention, these are not neutral. They shape what you see. They shape what becomes real for you. They shape what possibilities collapse into actuality in your life. And the deeper truth, the one that the quantum mechanics is pointing at, but that you have to be willing to look at directly to receive, is this. The observer is not just a mechanism for detecting reality. The observer is the ground of reality. Consciousness is not something that happens inside the universe. The universe is something that happens inside consciousness. And the quality of the consciousness doing the observing, whether it is identified with its contents or resting in its own nature as pure awareness, determines the entire quality of the reality that gets created through its observation. When you are fused with your narrative self, you are observing from inside a construction. And constructions have walls. Constructions limit what can be seen. Constructions have built-in filters that select for information that confirms the construction and exclude information that would threaten it. Your narrative self is not trying to show you reality. It is trying to survive, and survival requires the maintenance of a consistent story. So it selects, filters, distorts, and edits the incoming stream of experience to produce a version of reality that confirms what it already believes about itself. You are not seeing reality from inside your narrative self. You are seeing a carefully curated version of reality designed to maintain the story of who you are. But the watcher, the pure observer, the awareness that is watching the narrative self construct its story, that has no agenda, that has no survival requirement, that has no need to maintain a particular version of reality. The watcher simply sees. And what the watcher sees is not filtered through the story. It is not selected to confirm existing beliefs. It is not edited to maintain the construction. It is simply what is. And what is, when seen clearly, is always more workable than the story about what is. Always more transformable, always more alive with possibility than the fixed, defended, carefully maintained version the narrative self has been insisting on. This is why meditation traditions across thousands of years and every culture on earth have converged on the same essential practice: the cultivation of the observer. Not the cultivation of better thoughts, better emotions, better beliefs, better behaviors, though all of those may emerge. The cultivation of the capacity to watch. The development of the ability to step back from the contents of experience and rest in the awareness that contains the contents. The recognition of the watcher as your fundamental nature, not the thoughts, not the feelings, not the story, not the identity, but the awareness in which all of those arise, play out, and dissolve. This is not a new idea, but it is a perpetually radical one. Because every time a human being actually does this, actually finds the watcher and recognizes it as what they are, it is as disruptive and as liberating as it has always been. Because you cannot unfind it. Once you have seen the watcher, once you have recognized the awareness that was watching everything all along, you cannot go back to believing that you are only the contents. You might forget, you might get lost in the construction again. You might spend days or weeks or months back inside the narrative, but you will always be able to find your way back to the watcher, because now you know it's there. And here is the layer underneath that. Most people, when they first encounter this idea, make a particular mistake. They try to become the observer. They try to achieve the observer state. They try to get to the watcher as if it were a destination, a spiritual accomplishment. something you earn through practice or deserve through growth. And in the trying, they miss it entirely, because the trying is itself a content of experience. The trying is something the narrative self is doing. The trying is something the watcher is watching. You don't become the watcher, you recognize that you already are the watcher. You have always been the watcher. The watcher is not something you achieve. It is what you are before you add anything to it. It is the awareness that is present right now, reading these words, receiving these sounds, noticing the thoughts that arise in response to them. It is not behind your eyes, it is not in your head. It is the space in which your eyes and your head and your thoughts and your feelings are all appearing. It is the awareness that is aware of all of it. And it has never not been there. Let's do something right now. Not a thought exercise. This is an observation. Pause whatever you're doing with the part of your mind that analyzes and categorizes. Not forever, just for a moment. And instead of thinking about awareness, simply be aware. Notice that you are aware right now. Notice that there is a presence here, a knowing presence, a witnessing presence that is registering this moment. It is registering the sounds, the sensations, the thoughts that arise in response to those sounds and sensations. It is registering all of it without effort, without trying, without doing anything at all. Now notice something. That awareness, that witnessing presence, is not disturbed by what it contains. The thoughts can be anxious or calm, loud or quiet, pleasant or unpleasant. The awareness is not changed by any of it. The awareness remains. It is here before the thought and after the thought. It is here when you are happy and when you are in pain. It is here when you feel certain and when you feel lost. It has been here through every moment of your life, watching everything, changed by nothing. That is the watcher. That is what has been watching you all along. And here is the thing that should stop you completely. That awareness, that watcher, has never suffered. It has witnessed suffering. It has watched pain, confusion, loss, fear, shame, grief, and all of it. But the watcher itself has never been damaged by what it watched. Because the watcher is not the content. The watcher is the space in which the content appears. And space is not damaged by what moves through it. You have been identifying with the content and calling it yourself. And in doing so, you have been suffering as the content suffers, as thoughts suffer when they are fearful, as emotions suffer when they are painful, as identities suffer when they are threatened. But the watcher, the awareness that is your fundamental nature, has never suffered. It has been here all along, watching, clear, undamaged, present. This is not a consolation, this is not spiritual bypassing, this is not a way to avoid the pain or transcend the difficulty or pretend the contents of your experience don't matter. The pain is real, the patterns are real, the wounds are real. The watcher sees all of it with complete clarity and does not flinch from any of it. But the watcher knows something that the narrative self has been unable to know. That the contents are not the ground, that the pain is not the truth, that the pattern is not permanent, that the construction, however convincing, is still a construction, and constructions, when seen clearly, transform. Now let's look at what the illusion actually is, because I've been using that word, illusion, and I want to be precise about what it means and what it doesn't mean. Because this is where people often misunderstand and where the understanding matters enormously. The illusion is not that the world is unreal. The illusion is not that your experiences don't matter, or that your feelings are fabrications, or that the circumstances of your life are somehow beneath notice. The world is real. Your experiences matter. Your feelings are significant. The circumstances of your life deserve full, honest, clear-eyed attention. The illusion is this: that you are only the contents, that the thoughts are you, that the emotions are you, that the story is you, that the identity, the carefully constructed, continuously maintained narrative of who you are, is the totality of what you are. That is the illusion, not that the contents are unreal, but that the contents are the whole picture, that there is nothing watching the contents, that there is no awareness prior to and containing the thoughts, the feelings, the story, the identity. That is the illusion, and it is the most consequential illusion a human being can live inside of. Because when you believe you are only the contents, you are at the mercy of the contents. When a fearful thought arises, you are afraid. When an angry thought arises, you are angry. When a shameful story arises, you are ashamed. When a limiting belief activates, you are limited. You have no distance. You have no perspective. You have no capacity to watch the contents and see them for what they are: temporary, conditioned, constructed patterns arising in an awareness that is none of those things. And so you react. You always react. Because from inside the contents, there is nothing else to do. You cannot respond from inside a reaction. You can only react more. But from the observer position, from the watcher's seat, response becomes possible. Real response. Not the conditioned, automatic, pattern-driven reaction of the narrative self, but the clear, present, genuinely chosen response of awareness that has seen the situation as it actually is. This is what changes when you find the watcher, not the contents. The contents may remain exactly as they are for some time, but your relationship to the contents changes fundamentally, and your relationship to the contents is everything, because it determines whether you are running the pattern or watching the pattern, whether you are inside the construction or seeing the construction, whether you are reacting from the illusion or responding from the clarity of the observer. Let me show you the quantum mechanics of what happens when this shift occurs, because this is where the science becomes extraordinary. In quantum mechanics, there is a principle called decoherence. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, when it is observed, measured, entangled with other systems, the superposition of possible states collapses. The quantum system loses its quantum nature and begins to behave classically. It becomes definite. It becomes fixed. It becomes the kind of thing you can point to and say, this is what it is. Now here's the fascinating parallel. The narrative self, the constructed identity, the story of who you are, is a decoherence event. It is the collapse of the vast quantum superposition of what you could be into a specific, definite, fixed identity. Before the construction, before the story, before the accumulated weight of memory and conditioning and social feedback collapsed your sense of self into this particular person with this particular history, you were, in a very real sense, all possible versions of yourself simultaneously. Every possible way of being, every possible response to experience, every possible relationship to reality was available. The construction is not wrong, it is necessary and useful. But it is also a collapse, It is a narrowing of possibility into a specific fixed form. And the more rigidly you identify with the construction, the more thoroughly you have collapsed the quantum superposition of your potential into a single, defended, maintained version of yourself. The watcher, by contrast, is the quantum state before the collapse. The watcher is the awareness that precedes the construction, that contains the construction, that watches the construction without being defined by it. And when you access the watcher, when you step back from the contents and rest in the awareness that contains the contents, you are, in a very real sense, restoring some degree of quantum superposition to your experience. You are reopening the possibility space. You are creating the conditions in which something other than the conditioned pattern can arise. This is not metaphor. This is the mechanism by which genuine transformation occurs. When you are locked inside the narrative self, you can only produce what the narrative self can produce. The same thoughts, the same responses, the same patterns, the same reality. Because the narrative self is a closed system. It selects for what confirms it and excludes what threatens it. It cannot see outside its own construction. It cannot access possibilities that don't fit the story. But when you access the observer, when you find the watcher and watch from there, you are no longer inside the closed system. You are the awareness that contains the system. And from that position, the full range of possibility is available. Not because you've transcended the narrative self, not because you've escaped your conditioning, but because you are no longer identical to it. You are watching it. And what you watch, you can respond to. What you watch, you can see clearly. And what you see clearly, at the quantum level of consciousness, you fundamentally change. Let's go deeper into the specific thing you've been avoiding looking at, because I want to be very direct with you now. Everything we've discussed so far, the quantum mechanics, the observer effect, the nature of the narrative self, the watcher as fundamental awareness, all of it is pointing at something specific in your life, something you have been managing instead of watching, something you have been working around instead of looking directly at. Something that has been running your reality from the blind spot you've been carefully maintaining around it. You know what it is. You have always known what it is. You might have a different name for it in different moments. Sometimes it looks like fear, sometimes like resistance, sometimes like a pattern in your relationships. Sometimes like a recurring feeling that you can't quite locate but can't quite escape. But underneath all the different names and faces it wears, it is the same thing. The thing you keep not quite looking at. The thing you approach and then veer away from. The thing that lives in the periphery of your self-awareness, just outside the direct gaze of your attention. That thing is not dangerous. I want you to hear that clearly. Whatever you have been avoiding looking at is not dangerous to the watcher. It is only dangerous to the narrative self, to the construction that depends on not seeing it in order to maintain itself. Because if you see it clearly, the story changes, and the narrative self will do almost anything to prevent the story from changing. It will generate anxiety to pull your attention away. It will manufacture urgency about something else. It will produce elaborate rationalizations for why now is not the right time to look, why you need more preparation, more healing, more support before you can face this particular thing. It will convince you that looking directly at it would be destabilizing, dangerous, too much. It will tell you that you are not ready. Watch that. Right now, watch the resistance to looking. Watch the mechanism by which your mind moves away from the thing you know you need to see. Don't fight it. Don't try to overcome it. Just watch it. Watch the resistance as the watcher watches, with clear, steady, unflinching attention. Watch the anxiety that arises when you get close to the thing. Watch the distraction that emerges. Watch the elaborate story about why this isn't the right moment. Watch all of it. And notice the watcher is not threatened by any of it. The watcher watches the resistance and is not resistant. The watcher watches the anxiety and is not anxious. The watcher watches the story about not being ready and knows with absolute clarity that the watcher is always ready because the watcher has no preparation requirement. The watcher has no vulnerability to what it watches. The watcher simply sees, and in the seeing, something extraordinary happens. The resistance, that elaborate, energy-consuming, life-shaping mechanism of avoidance, begins to soften. Not because you fought it or overcame it or convinced yourself out of it, but because you watched it, because the light of your clear attention fell on it. And in that light, it revealed itself for what it is. Not a protection, not a wisdom, not a signal that you are not ready, but a habit. A conditioned pattern of avoidance that has been running on autopilot for so long that it has started to feel like a permanent feature of your landscape. It is not permanent, it is a pattern. And patterns, when watched with clear attention, lose their automaticity. They don't disappear immediately. Patterns have momentum, they have neural architecture, they have years of reinforcement behind them. But they lose their invisibility. They lose their power to run you from the blind spot. Because the moment you see the pattern clearly, the moment the watcher's attention falls on it without flinching, it can no longer pretend to be the ground. It reveals itself as a construction. And constructions, once seen as constructions, can be watched without being inhabited. This is where it gets precise. This is the specific mechanics of how the watcher transforms what it watches. When you are inside a pattern, when you are the pattern, identified with it, living from within it, the pattern has total authority over your experience. It determines what you see, what you feel, what you believe is possible, what you believe about yourself and others. It is invisible to you because you are looking through it, not at it. And what you look through, you cannot see. Only what you look at can be seen. But the moment you step back, the moment you find the watcher and watch the pattern from there, the pattern becomes an object of observation rather than the subject doing the observing. And this is not a small shift. This is a fundamental change in the structure of your experience. Because objects of observation are not the same as subjects of observation. Objects can be seen. Objects can be examined. Objects can be understood in their structure and their mechanism. Objects can be watched with enough clarity that their hold on you loosens. Not because you fought them, but because you saw them. This is the ancient wisdom that quantum mechanics has now confirmed in its own precise mathematical language. What you observe, you change, not by controlling it, not by forcing it, not by willing it to be different, simply by seeing it clearly, by bringing the quality of the watcher's attention to it, by refusing to look away. Let me show you the second layer of this. Because there is a deeper level of the illusion that most people never reach, and it is the level that makes everything else make sense. There is a woman named Mira. She has spent years studying consciousness, meditation, philosophy of mind. She is, by most measures, highly self-aware. She can identify her patterns with precision. She understands the observer effect. She has read the quantum mechanics. She has sat in meditation for thousands of hours. She has found the watcher many times. She knows what it feels like to step back from the contents and rest in the awareness that contains the contents. And yet, there is something she has not seen, something that has been hiding in plain sight, using her very sophistication as its camouflage. Something that has been watching her watching, and calling itself the Watcher. One afternoon, Mira is sitting in meditation. She is in the observer state. She is watching thoughts arise and dissolve, watching sensations come and go, watching the whole display of experience with what she believes is pure, detached, witnessing awareness. And she is feeling, underneath all of it, a subtle satisfaction, a quiet pride, the sense of being someone who knows how to do this, someone who has developed this capacity, someone who is good at watching. And then she sees it. She sees that the watcher she has been inhabiting is not the pure awareness she thought it was. It is a refined version of the narrative self. It is the identity of the meditator, the identity of the self-aware person, the identity of the one who has done the work and developed the capacity to observe. It is still a construction. It is still a story. It is still content. It is just content that has learned to wear the costume of the observer. The real watcher, the pure awareness that is prior to all constructions, including the construction of the spiritual seeker, is watching this too. The real watcher is watching Mira watch, and watching the subtle pride in the watching, and watching the identity of the watcher, and watching all of it with the same clear, unattached, utterly impersonal presence that it watches everything else. And when Mira sees this, when she sees the watcher behind the watcher, the awareness that is watching even her watching, something collapses that she didn't know was still standing. The last layer of the construction, the most subtle version of the identity, the one that had learned to use spiritual sophistication as its means of survival. And in that collapse, there is something she has never felt before in all her years of practice. Not the peace of the meditator, not the calm of the skilled observer. Something more fundamental, more impersonal, more vast. The awareness that has no name for itself. The watcher that is not a role, not an achievement, not a capacity you develop, but the simple, unchanging, ever-present fact of consciousness itself. The ground before the ground, the seeing before the seer. And you have been both Elias and Mira. You have been the one who suffers inside the pattern, and you have been the one who watches the pattern from a position that is still subtly inside a more sophisticated construction. Both are valid stages, both are real. But neither is the final seeing. The final seeing is always one layer deeper than wherever you currently are. The watcher is always watching the watcher. The observer is always prior to the observed. Even when the observed is itself an observer, this is not a regression. This is not a reason to doubt your progress or your practice or your genuine insights. This is the nature of awareness itself. It is always deeper than you think. There is always a watcher behind the watcher. And the recognition of this is not disorienting. It is liberating. Because it means that no matter how lost you get in the contents, no matter how thoroughly the narrative self reclaims you, no matter how deep inside the construction you find yourself, the watcher is still there, still watching, still clear, still the ground that cannot be destroyed by what appears on it. You cannot lose the watcher, you can only lose sight of it temporarily. And the practice, the real practice, the one that underlies all other practices, is simply the return. The moment of recognition, the turning of attention back toward the awareness that has been here all along. Not achieving the observer state, not maintaining it, just returning to it, again and again and again. Each return is complete in itself. Each moment of recognition is the whole thing. Has there been a moment in your own life when watching something clearly, really seeing it without reacting, dissolved its hold on you? I want to hear about that moment specifically. Leave it in the comments. What was the thing and what happened when you finally looked at it directly? Let's do the second practice now. This one goes deeper. Find the thing you've been avoiding looking at, the specific thing, not conceptually. Actually bring it into your awareness. Let it be here. Let the feeling of it be present. Let the resistance to it be present. Let everything that arises when you bring it close, the anxiety, the discomfort, the urge to think about something else, the sudden sense of tiredness or distraction, let all of it be present. Now watch it, not from inside it, from the awareness that contains it. Notice that you are aware of this thing. Notice that the awareness in which this thing is appearing is not the thing itself. Notice that there is a space here, a clear, open, undisturbed space in which this difficult thing is arising. And notice that the space is not disturbed by the thing. The space is not anxious. The space is not threatened. The space is simply here, containing the thing, allowing the thing to be exactly as it is. Now watch what happens when you stop trying to change the thing and simply watch it. Watch it the way the sky watches a storm. Not resisting, not engaging, not trying to make it different, just containing it, just being the space in which it is happening. Watch it with the kind of attention that is neither cold nor distant, but clear and present and completely willing to see what is actually there. Notice if the thing begins to shift, not because you forced it, not because you willed it to be different, but because the quality of your attention has changed. Because you are watching it now instead of being it. Because the watcher's light has fallen on it. And in that light, things reveal themselves. Things that seemed solid reveal their transparency. Things that seem permanent reveal their movement. Things that seem like the truth reveal themselves as constructions. And constructions, in the clear light of the watcher's attention, transform. Sit with that for a moment. Don't rush past what you just saw. Now let's look at the practical dimension of this, because I know that someone is listening to this who has been doing the work, who has been meditating, reading, growing, trying to understand themselves, and who is wondering if the watcher is always here, if awareness is always present, why does the suffering continue? Why do the patterns persist? Why does the same pain keep returning even after years of genuine work? This is the right question, and it deserves a precise answer. The patterns persist because knowing about the watcher is not the same as being the watcher. Understanding the observer effect intellectually is not the same as observing from the observer position. Having a concept of pure awareness is not the same as resting in pure awareness. The knowledge is useful. It points in the right direction, but the pointing is not the arriving, and no amount of pointing will substitute for the actual turn of attention, the actual recognition, the actual moment of seeing from the watcher's seat. This is why the practice matters, not as a means of achieving something you don't have, but as a repeated, deliberate act of recognition. Each time you practice, each time you deliberately step back from the contents of experience and find the awareness that contains the contents, you are not building the watcher, you are remembering it. You are making the recognition more available, more accessible, more automatic. You are training your attention to return to its source more readily, more quickly, with less friction. And over time, not through dramatic transformation, but through the accumulation of ordinary moments of recognition, the center of gravity of your identity shifts. It shifts from the narrative self to the watcher, not completely, not permanently, not in some final, achieved, never again lost way. But significantly, the narrative self does not disappear, but it becomes less totalizing. It becomes one part of the landscape rather than the entire landscape. It becomes something the watcher watches rather than the watcher itself. And from that shift in center of gravity, everything changes, not because the contents of your life have changed, though they often do, because the quality of your observation changes the quality of your choices and your responses and your relationships and your creative capacity. But more fundamentally, because your experience of your life changes. Because you are no longer at the mercy of every thought, every emotion, every story that the narrative self generates. Because you have access to the observer position, and from that position you can see clearly enough to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be driven, to create rather than repeat. This is what the quantum mechanics is pointing at when it says the observer changes what is observed. Not that you have some magical power to control reality with your thoughts, but that the quality of your consciousness, the clarity of your seeing, the steadiness of your attention, the degree to which you are observing from the watcher's seat, rather than reacting from inside the construction, this quality is not neutral. It participates in the creation of your experience. It shapes what is possible. It determines what collapses out of the quantum superposition of potential into the specific, actual, lived reality of your life. The clearer the observer, the more clearly reality is seen, and the more clearly reality is seen, the more fully it can respond to the clarity of the seeing. This is not magic. This is the fundamental nature of the relationship between consciousness and reality. They are not separate. They never were. The observer and the observed are one system, and the quality of the observer is the quality of the reality being observed. Here's what no one tells you about the watcher behind the illusion. The watcher is not a reward for spiritual practice. It is not something you earn by doing enough work or suffering enough or achieving enough insight. The watcher is not waiting for you at the end of a long path of development. The watcher is the beginning of the path, the middle of the path, and the end of the path. The watcher is the path itself. Because the path is not a journey from one place to another, it is a deepening recognition of what was always already here. And this means something very specific about the nature of your situation right now. Right now, in this moment, the watcher is here. Not as a potential, not as something you're working toward, not as a state you'll achieve when you've done enough preparation. Here. Now. The awareness that is receiving these words, that is noticing the thoughts arising in response to these words, that is present through all of it. That is the watcher, not a representation of the watcher, not a concept of the watcher, not a memory of a previous moment when you access the watcher, the actual watcher, the real thing, here. And the only question is, are you recognizing it as what you are, or are you still looking for it somewhere else, trying to achieve it, trying to become it? Because you cannot become what you already are. You can only recognize it. And recognition does not require preparation. It does not require a certain level of development or a certain quality of experience or a certain resolution of your problems. It requires only this, the willingness to look, the willingness to turn attention toward the awareness that is already here, already watching, already clear, and to recognize it as your own nature. That willingness, that simple, courageous, often uncomfortable willingness to look at what is actually here, is the whole practice. Everything else follows from it. Every insight, every transformation, every shift in how you relate to your experience, every change in the quality of your reality, all of it follows from the simple, repeated, deliberate act of looking, of watching, of being the watcher rather than the watched. Let's look at one more layer, because there is something that happens after the recognition, something that is rarely talked about because it is subtle and easily missed, but that is perhaps the most important thing of all. When you recognize the watcher, when you find the awareness that is your fundamental nature and rest in it even briefly, there is often a sense of relief, of coming home, of finally being in the right place after a very long time of being somewhere else. This is real. This is genuine. Honor it. But then the narrative self returns, the thoughts resume, the emotions arise, the story picks up where it left off, the patterns reassert themselves, and there can be a kind of disappointment in this. A sense that the recognition was temporary, that you've lost it, that you're back where you started. Watch that. Watch the disappointment. Watch the story about having lost the watcher. And notice who is watching the disappointment. Who is aware of the story about having lost the watcher? The watcher. The watcher is watching the story about having lost the watcher. The watcher never left. The watcher was watching the whole time, watching the recognition, watching the return of the narrative self, watching the disappointment, watching the story about loss. The watcher does not come and go. The recognition of the watcher comes and goes. And the difference between those two things is everything. You do not lose the watcher when you get lost in the contents. You lose sight of the watcher. And the moment you notice that you've lost sight of it, the moment there is awareness of the forgetting, the watcher is already here again. Already watching, already clear. This is the practice in its most essential form, not the achievement of a permanent state of pure witnessing, but the willingness to return, to notice the forgetting and return to the recognizing, to notice the immersion in the contents and return to the awareness that contains the contents. Not once, not twice, but as many times as it takes, because each return is complete in itself. Because each time you find the watcher again, you are not picking up from where you left off. You are starting fresh in the only moment that exists, which is now. And over time, this changes something fundamental. Not through accumulation, not through achievement, but through the deepening of a recognition that was always complete. The watcher has always been here. You have always been the watcher. The illusion was never that the watcher didn't exist. The illusion was that you were something other than the watcher, and every moment of recognition dismantles that illusion a little further. Not by fighting it, not by transcending it, but by seeing through it, by watching it clearly enough that it can no longer maintain itself as the ground. This is what happens when you finally see the watcher behind the illusion. The illusion does not disappear. The contents do not vanish. The thoughts continue, the emotions continue, the patterns continue for a while, and then less, and then differently, and then sometimes in ways you could not have predicted from inside the construction. But the relationship to all of it changes, fundamentally, irreversibly changes, because you can no longer fully believe that you are only the contents. Because you have seen the watcher, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. I want to speak directly to you now, not to a general audience, not to the concept of a viewer, but to you specifically, the one who has been listening to this, the one who has been watching these words, the one who is sitting with whatever is arising in response to what has been said here. Something in you recognized this before your mind could catch up. Something in you knew before the first word of this transmission that this was the thing you needed to hear. Not because you didn't know it already, but because you needed to hear it in a way that made it impossible to look away from. Because you needed someone to point at the watcher and say, that is what you are, not what you should become, what you are. You have been doing something remarkable. You have been watching your life with enough honesty to recognize that something deeper is available. You have been willing to look at the patterns, to acknowledge the cycles, to question the construction. That willingness, that courage to look, is not common. Most people spend their entire lives inside the narrative self, managing the contents, reacting to the construction, never once questioning whether the construction is the whole picture. You have been questioning, you have been looking, and that looking has been bringing you here, to this recognition, to this moment, to the direct seeing of the watcher that has been watching all along. The fact that you are still here means you are willing to look. That is rare, and it is enough. It is more than enough. Because the willingness to look is the only thing required. The watcher does the rest. The watcher always does the rest. Your only job is to keep looking, to keep returning, to keep choosing the observer position over the reactive position, the witnessing over the reacting, the clear seeing over the comfortable blindness. Let's do the final practice. Sit with this question, not as a thought exercise, as a genuine act of observation. Ask yourself right now in this moment, what is aware? Not what are you thinking, not what are you feeling, not what is your situation. What is aware? What is the awareness that is aware of the thinking, the feeling, the situation? Find it. Not by looking for it as an object. It is not an object. Find it by recognizing it as the subject. The awareness that is reading these words, the consciousness that is present right now, the watcher that has been watching everything, including this moment. Rest there. Not for long, just for a moment, just long enough to recognize this is here. This has always been here. This is what I am before I add anything to it. Now notice, from here, from this awareness, from this watcher's seat, what looks different? What do you see about your life, your patterns, your situation that you couldn't see from inside the construction? What becomes visible when you are watching from the watcher rather than living from the narrative? Let whatever arises arise. Don't force an insight. Don't manufacture a revelation. Just watch. Just be the watcher. Just be the awareness that is aware of this moment, this question, this open space of genuine seeing. And notice, the watcher is not concerned. The watcher is not worried about what it finds or doesn't find. The watcher is not trying to fix anything or achieve anything or become anything. The watcher is simply here, simply seeing, simply the clear and open awareness that has been your fundamental nature through every moment of your life. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Now let's talk about what happens in the world when you live from this position. Because the observer effect is not only an internal phenomenon. The quality of your consciousness, the degree to which you are watching from the watcher's seat rather than reacting from inside the construction, affects everything around you, every relationship, every creative endeavor, every challenge you face, every opportunity that appears. When you're inside the narrative self, you are in a constant state of subtle reaction. Every person you encounter is being processed through the filters of your construction, assessed for threat or safety, for confirmation or challenge, for what they can give you or what they might take. Every situation is being evaluated through the lens of the story about who you are and what you deserve and what is possible for you. Every choice is being made from within a framework that was built to maintain the construction, not to serve your deepest intelligence. This is exhausting, and it is limiting in ways that are almost impossible to see from inside it, because the limitation looks like reality. The construction's ceiling looks like the actual ceiling. The construction's walls look like the actual walls of what is possible. But from the observer position, from the watcher's seat, the ceiling and the walls reveal themselves as constructions, and constructions can be watched through, not demolished, not transcended, but seen clearly enough that they no longer function as the definition of what is possible. Because from the watcher's seat, what is possible is not determined by the story. What is possible is the full quantum superposition of everything that could arise in this moment, in this situation, in this life, before the narrative self collapses it into the familiar, the expected, the consistent with what has always been. This is the real meaning of creating your reality, not the simplified version. Think positive thoughts and good things will happen. Not the magical thinking version. Visualize what you want, and the universe will deliver it. The real, precise, quantum mechanical version. The quality of your observation participates in the creation of what is observed. The clarity of your seeing participates in the creation of what is seen. The degree to which you are watching from the watcher's seat rather than reacting from inside the construction determines the range of possibilities that can collapse into actuality in your life. When you watch from the watcher, when you are genuinely in the observer position, clear and present and not identified with the contents, you are not just receiving a different experience of your reality. You are participating differently in its creation. You are bringing a different quality of consciousness to the quantum field of your experience. And that different quality of consciousness creates different collapses, different actualities, different realities, not because you are controlling anything, because you are seeing more clearly. And what you see more clearly, you can respond to more genuinely. And genuine responses that arise from the full clarity of the observer rather than the conditioned automaticity of the narrative self, create genuinely different outcomes, not through magic, through the simple, profound, quantum mechanical fact that consciousness and reality are not separate. They are one system, and the quality of the consciousness is the quality of the reality. there is a question I want to leave with you, and I want you to hold it not as something to answer, but as something to watch. Not a question to solve, a question to observe. The question is this: what would be different in your life if you spent even a fraction of the time you currently spend reacting to your experience simply watching it instead? Not changing it, not fixing it, not trying to make it better or different or more aligned with what you want. Just watching it, just being the watcher, just bringing the clear, steady, unflinching attention of the observer to the contents of your experience, to the patterns, the emotions, the thoughts, the stories, the recurring situations, and watching what happens when they are truly seen. Watch that question. Notice what arises. Notice the resistance that might come, the voice that says that's not practical, that watching isn't doing, that you need to act, not observe. Watch that voice. Notice who is watching it. Notice that the watcher is not disturbed by the voice, not convinced by it, not moved by it in any direction. The watcher simply sees it for what it is: another content, another construction, another pattern arising in the awareness that contains all patterns. And notice underneath the resistance, underneath the voice, underneath the familiar pull back toward reaction and management and doing, notice if there is a quieter recognition, a knowing that has been here all along, a sense that this watching, this clear seeing, this observer position is not foreign to you, not something you're learning for the first time. Something you're remembering, something that has always been available, something that has been waiting patiently for you to stop looking away long enough to see it. Because you have been watching longer than you realize. The watcher has been here through everything, through every moment of confusion and clarity, every cycle of suffering and relief. Every time you thought you'd finally figured it out, and every time you felt hopelessly lost again, the watcher was there, watching, clear, unchanged by any of it. And now you see it, not as a concept, not as a philosophy, not as an interesting framework for thinking about consciousness, as the actual, present, immediate reality of what you are. The awareness that is here right now, the watcher that has been watching all along, the observer that was never not observing. This is not a small thing. Do not rush past what you just saw. Because the moment you truly see the watcher, the moment the recognition lands not just in your mind, but in the full, embodied, present moment reality of your experience, something shifts that cannot unshift. The center of gravity changes, the identification loosens, the illusion reveals itself as an illusion, not falsely, not dismissively, but precisely, clearly, with full respect for the reality of the contents, while seeing through the claim that the contents are the whole picture. You are not the thoughts. You are the awareness in which the thoughts arise. You are not the emotions. You are the awareness in which the emotions move. You are not the story. You are the awareness in which the story is being told. You are not the identity. You are the awareness in which the identity is constructed and maintained and occasionally questioned and sometimes transformed. You are the watcher. You have always been the watcher, and the watcher sees all, not with the cold detachment of someone who has checked out of their life, but with the warm, clear, fully present attention of someone who is finally, completely, courageously here, watching everything, missing nothing, changed by nothing, transforming everything simply by seeing it clearly. If you have found something in this transmission, if something has shifted, even slightly, in how you understand what you are and what is available to you. I want to know what you saw, not what you thought about it, what you actually saw when you looked. Drop it in the comments. One word, one sentence, whatever is most true. Because the field of observers, the community of people who are willing to look where others won't, is not just a collection of individuals. It is a shared quality of attention. And shared attention amplifies. When you name what you saw, you make it more real. You collapse it further into actuality. You honor the seeing with the willingness to be seen. Type this if it landed, see the watcher. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. Or drop one word that names what you observed during this transmission. Whatever word is most true, the field will hold it. And if you know someone who has been living inside the construction for too long, someone who's ready to stop reacting and start watching, someone who's close to the recognition but hasn't quite found the watcher yet, share this with them. Not to convince them of anything, not to teach them something, just to give them the chance to look. And consider this, when you share something that helped you see clearly, you are not simply passing along information, you are giving someone else permission to look at what they've been avoiding. That act of permission, extended from one observer to another, creates a field of shared seeing that amplifies the clarity for both of you. What you saw alone becomes more real when witnessed together. The recognition deepens in the sharing of it. Because sometimes all it takes is someone pointing at the right thing at the right moment. And the right moment is always now. Return to this when the noise of the day has settled, or when you notice yourself reacting instead of watching. The watcher will be here. It is always here. Stay with the watching. Stay in the clarity. Return to the watcher as many times as you need to, which is as many times as you forget, which is as many times as it takes, which is exactly the right number. There is no failure in the forgetting. There is only the return, and every return is complete. Here is what I want you to carry from this. The observer is the most powerful position in the universe. Not because it controls, not because it forces, not because it demands a particular outcome from reality, because it sees clearly. And clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. When you see clearly, when the watcher is watching without the filters of the narrative self, without the distortions of the construction, without the urgency of the reaction, reality responds. Not to your commands, to your clarity, to the quality of your seeing, to the presence of an observer who is genuinely here, genuinely watching, genuinely willing to see what is actually there. What you watch, you change. What you avoid watching controls you. You have been watching. You have been willing to look at things that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And that watching, that willingness, that courage, that refusal to look away has been building something in you, something that is not an achievement, not an accomplishment, not a level you've reached, something more fundamental. The recognition of what you already are, the watcher, the observer, the awareness that is the ground of everything you experience and the source of everything you create. That is what you are, not what you're working toward, not what you'll become when you've done enough work. What you are, right now, in this moment. In every moment, the watcher sees all. The watcher has always seen all, and now you see the watcher. You were never meant to look away. The next layer of this lives in the video about the autopilot running everyone around you. Once you can see the watcher in yourself, watching the unconscious programs operating in others becomes unavoidable. And that seeing changes every relationship you're in. That one is worth your full attention.